What is going on? Welcome into the Brant Parcel Show. So, let's stick to, we'll keep talking about the draft. So, I think what happens with the cornerback rankings, are just kind of all over the place. Quinyon Mitchell. Mitchell seems to be the guy people are talking about the most. I think Terrion Arnold. I think, honestly, if you had to go consensus, probably those two guys are the top two right now. Terrion Arnold, I think he's taking a hit because of Kool-Aid McKinstry is getting so much praise that now, like, a lot of people will not get off the fact that he's kind of that other corner. He's, not that you should label him the other Alabama corner, but that's kind of just like the natural label a guy gets. It's kind of like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of an example. It's kind of like for years Clemson, it's like that year Clemson had all four of those defensive linemen come out. Then you kind of like, sometimes that kind of benefited them, but sometimes that kind of hurts a guy when you got multiple guys on one team. Because it's just, especially at the same position, like you got team with two really good edge rushers, and then in one mind, someone gets the one edge rusher they really like in their mind, and then the team drafts the other one. You're kind of like, oh man, we didn't get the guy. We didn't even get the guy that I wanted. The best player on that team. So, but Terrion Arnold, terrific player. This draft, the receiver core I really like. There's some guys Jacob Cowing. If you want to talk about names, a lot of players that could be really good that people aren't really talking about, that don't really get talked about, is some of like the top end players. Jacob Cowing's another guy from Arizona. So I really like him. And then I just want to reiterate, it's crazy Brock Bowers slipping out of mock drafts in the top 10. It makes you wonder, because like Detroit Sports Talk, I think it looked like they had a take on this about the Lions trading up and drafting Brock Bowers. It makes you wonder, like, if Brock Bowers were to fall to, like, 7th, 8th, 9th spot, because I don't see him falling out of the top 10. It makes you wonder if, like, a team would give up a huge haul to go get him. Because you look at the value of tight ends, whether it's George Kittle in San Francisco or Sam Laporta in Detroit or Travis Kelce in Kansas City. That's the thing. I don't think tight end's a position where it's like, people think T.J. Hawkinson, Eric Ebron, Kyle Pitts, guys that went top 5, top 10 at the tight end position that haven't really been, they've been solid, but they never have really been that good. So you kind of like, it's one of those positions where you kind of think twice about drafting a guy like that or drafting a tight end in the top 10, but it's one of those positions where if you find an elite guy, it can turn your offense into a juggernaut. Hence the Detroit Lions, San Francisco 49ers, Kansas City Chiefs, prime examples. Obviously, the Chiefs have Mahomes, and the 49ers are just a good all-around football team, a good offense, a good offensive-minded head coach. But you see my point that a tight end can really get your offense that extra boost. Keep an eye on Brock Bowers, where he goes. I know I've been discussing it, but where Brock Bowers goes in this draft is going to be fascinating. Some other guys to kind of watch in the draft. Troy Franklin's another guy, wide receiver out of Oregon. I like Franklin's game, honestly. I think he's a good player. I think some mock drafts have him going first round. I think he's one of those guys where, I could definitely see him going late first round. I think he's a guy where he could get drafted and people would be like, I don't think it would come as a surprise, but I think if he goes first round, I think that's just kind of like I think it's number one, a testament to the talent of the wide receiver group in this class, but I also think it's it's kind of the case of, here's another run on receivers. It's crazy though, because I feel like the NFL, every year more receivers get drafted in the first, second, third rounds than I expect. I feel like a lot of teams, I don't feel like there's a lot of wide receiver NFL needy teams. I think the Lions definitely were a wide receiver needy team. Seemed like the Ravens were a wide receiver needy team for a while. They finally kind of cleared that up because they took Bateman a couple years ago. He's been decent, and then Zay Flowers has kind of done a good job. Zay Flowers had a nice rookie year, so the Ravens have kind of they were a wide receiver needy team for a while. I know the Chiefs kind of were the last couple of years. Some people think they might, but it seems like there's just not a lot of wide receiver needy teams, but somehow wide receivers just keep getting drafted. It's one of those things where wide receivers, like, it's a position, excuse me, where, you know, it's not like, you could argue it's maybe the least important position in the NFL, and I don't mean that as any disrespect or throwing shade at, you know, wide receivers in the NFL or in college football or the guys coming out, but it's like, you know, if you have a really good all-around team and you're lacking at the wide receiver position, you know, the good all-around, you know, the good offensive line, good quarterback can kind of make up for that. But yeah, the way the NFL, you know, even though wide receiver is at times talked about as an overrated position and maybe not that valuable, the way the NFL is changing, the way the teams throw the ball, the screens, you know, the ability, they're how much in space and how, you know, ticky-tacky the pass interference can be. You know, the NFL is built for wide receivers to thrive, and it's built for the NFL to continue to evolve into a passing offense. So yeah, very wide receiver friendly league as we sit right now currently in the NFL. What are teams like 65, 35 pass to run ratio? So you're talking about a league where it's pass heavy. So I guess the bottom line is, whether you think the wide receiver position's overrated or not, the demand for wide receiver is always going to be there, and the demand for elite wide receiver is going to be high. So but yeah, Marvin Harrison got a chance to be a really great player. Where he goes is going to be interesting. But yeah, I think the Jets combine him with Garrett Wilson, that could be a really nice combo. I got to get into the defensive tackle position, but kind of like I talked about last video, the defensive tackle position. There's a lot of guys I really like. I think I'm talking about, so the Jaguars kind of an interesting team right now. A lot of people think the Jaguars will take corner. I think, you know, Jacksonville, a team where they've kind of been like the Eagles, a really cornerback needy team. It seems like for a while, they've, you know, since the Jalen Ramsey trade, you know, there's at least them the Raiders, and who was the other team I just said? Then the Raiders and Eagles seems like they're kind of been cornerback needy for a while now. So a lot of people have Nate Wiggins going to the Eagles. Jacksonville, Terrion Arnold. I've seen Terrion Arnold getting mocked there. So yeah, if you look at the Jacksonville Jaguars, a team that's cornerback needy, they did a good job of kind of addressing their offensive line needs, getting Antoine Harrison last year, that tackle from Oklahoma, obviously set at the cornerback position. Defensive line, they've done a good job of upgrading there. I know they did. They've done that over the years. Linebacker they've addressed. So yeah, I think cornerback's kind of like the default need if you're talking about Jacksonville, because they don't, you know, they've cleared up a lot of, even though if you could argue that their roster at linebacker and even on the defensive line is not great, but they've really filled holes in pretty much everywhere on that roster. Running back, obviously, with Travis Etienne is fine. Receiver, getting Calvin Ridley, you know, and then they signed Christian Kirk. So wide receiver's fine. They're obviously, could they take a wide receiver at some point? Sure, you have it, more weapons the better for Trevor Lawrence, but Jacksonville, it seems like corner is a pressing need, if you will. But yeah, what the Chicago Bears do is going to be fascinating. What the Bears do, yeah, it makes you know, because if they get Caleb Williams, to me, I think I like the fact that a lot of people have him at the nice pick, getting weapons, whether it's Rome Odunze, Brock Bowers, you know, getting more weapons. Like I touched on with Jacksonville, more weapon, like with Jacksonville getting weapons for Lawrence, you know, more weapons the better. But sometimes I think people get a little too infatuated into getting quarterbacks weapons. I think at some point you got to get offensive line help, and I know they did that last year. The Bears took Darnell Wright. I think that was a pick. Maybe they kind of saw with now that they have a regime that didn't draft Justin Fields, that was kind of the writing on the wall that maybe Justin Fields isn't the long-term pick, thinking that, okay, we're kind of 50-50 on Justin Fields. We'll take a pick that doesn't necessarily, that may not be a huge benefit to him right away, and a guy like Darnell Wright will benefit him as far as getting him protection, but is not another, we're not going to get him another weapon. We're going to see if we got DJ Moore. We're going to see if he can succeed with an elite receiver. I'll use the tag elite receiver for DJ Moore. We'll use an elite receiver, and then we'll get this offensive line at least solid. I don't know what the Bears offensive line ranked this year by Pro Football Focus, or, I didn't really study the Bears offensive line too closely, but I think it's safe to say they are a solid unit. It's not a good unit. It's definitely not a great unit by any means, but I think it is a solid unit. So the Bears, at least with a solid offensive line, and then you add I guess the point I'm trying to make is, if they do draft Caleb Williams, now at least with a solid offensive line, and then that 9th pick, you get a guy like Odunze, Brock Bowers. Now you can at least say we have a solid offensive line in elite position groups. I guess that's what I was kind of getting at the whole time, as opposed to, let's try, because I don't think they can turn this offensive line into an elite offensive line in this draft. So as opposed to getting a good offensive line and still keeping a solid to good, instead of just keeping good at both, let's make one elite. Let's make in the wide receiver position group to make elite with the 9th pick, and getting Odunze or Brock Bowers would be an easier task. So let's keep a solid offensive line group. Let's watch Darnell Wright develop, and then let's get another weapon for Caleb Williams. So I think that's kind of the thought process with taking Caleb Williams and then drafting a skill position player, a weapon for him like Odunze, Brock Bowers, or even Malik Neighbors if he were to fall there. Is offensive line solid? Now let's just give him no excuses as far as guys to throw to. You got to think, if they take Odunze, Brock Bowers, Malik Neighbors, even if they took a guy like Brian Thomas, or whoever they take at 9, that's a tight end or wide receiver. If Caleb Williams struggles with their offensive line being solid, and then an elite wide receiver group that with DJ Moore, Odunze, and trying to remember who else they have at wide receiver. If he struggles, then that's got to be. Will they replace Caleb Williams after year 1? No, but if that does not give you some red flags that Caleb Williams may not have a very good career in the NFL, then I don't know what will. So, but yeah, that's always the argument. Protection for the quarterback or wide receivers. I know that was the debate ad nauseum for the Bengals a few years ago when they drafted Jamar Chase. Do you take a elite receiver, or do you take an offensive lineman? The Bengals, I guess, were a primary case of the Bengals, I guess, are what the Bears could be. And I'll explain. Because you look at, the Bengals got to a Super Bowl with you could argue it was a solid offensive line. You could also argue it was at least average to solid offensive line, but they had elite playmakers at wide receiver, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins. I think that's what the Bears maybe have the vision. Obviously, this is still hypothetical because they haven't done it, but the Bears maybe have the vision to do what the Bengals did. Let's get an elite quarterback with elite weapons, and then we'll try to solve the offensive line issues later. Because, I think that's the Bears. I think the Bears knew a long time ago they were all in on Caleb Williams. When that point was, I don't know, but I think, the Justin Fields trade was a perfect example of, them trading Justin Fields was just like the nail in the coffin, or the moment you knew they were going to take Caleb Williams. But yeah, we'll see what they do there, or we'll see what they do with the 9th pick. 9th pick, with the Bears is certainly going to be one to watch. Do the Bears trade back up? Do they trade up and try to get Marvin Harrison? Now Caleb Williams, Marvin Harrison. I'll say, even if that's not a elite duo as far as a selfish, as far as getting views, ratings. You talk about, you bring in Caleb Williams, Marvin Harrison, two of the probably the most notable names in this year's NFL draft. That's how you certainly attract viewers and fans. Obviously, you want to do everything you can to win games, but if you're really trying to attract viewers, Marvin Harrison and Caleb Williams, that's a fascinating combo. So yeah, the wide receiver group, so talented. Malik Nabers, I love Malik Nabers. You know, I really got an appreciation for his game watching him this year. And yeah, the edge group, kind of back and forth between Dallas Turner and Braylon Trice, who I think is the top edge rusher. Like I discussed before with Braylon Trice, I think Trice is a guy you just have to turn on the tape. You can't forget his production, forget even his highlights, forget his production. You have to go watch games of Braylon Trice. You know, he's a guy where, you know, kind of like Laiatu Latu. They're both similar guys in the sense that, you know, you watch them, you watch highlights and you look at their production. If you just watch highlights and you look at their production, you're like, pretty good player. Maybe a late first round, second round guy, maybe a guy that can develop into a good edge rusher over time. But if you actually watch, when you watch a full game, you see just the type of pressure and the type of disruption these guys can cause. You know, Braylon Trice, I haven't watched his tape deeply this year, but last year, if you watch his tape, you understand kind of the pressure this guy puts on offensive linemen. And he's a guy that you don't always want to talk about. You want to avoid the word almost in sports and life. You know, like I almost made $100,000 this year, or I almost bench press 225 today. You want to avoid almost, but Braylon Trice, if you watched last year, there was so many times where he didn't get the sack, but he was right by the quarterback. Not necessarily affecting the quarterback's throw, but just getting to the quarterback's big. Because that's the thing. Some guys will have a year where they, not just in college football in the NFL, they'll have a lot of sacks. But it was more so just like the secondary was good, quarterback held onto the ball too long, and the guy was able to eventually get off the block late and get a sack. And sometimes you see a guy with 8-9 sacks, but it's kind of like you got to take it with a grain of salt because he wasn't necessarily being disruptive. He was just kind of getting production. So that's the thing with Braylon Trice. Even though the production wasn't there, he is a classic case of, you know, he's disrupting things. You know, he's causing multiple guys to have to block him. And you look at a guy like Braylon Trice, or that's why guys that are on winning teams are so coveted so much, is because, you know, when you have a national title team, usually you have one defensive lineman that's disrupted. Look at Michigan, Mason Graham, Chris Jenkins. They had a couple of, at least multiple guys. You know, Alabama. I know Alabama didn't win it all, but Alabama had Dallas Turner. You know, you look at the rest of the Alabama offensive line that wasn't that disruptive or wasn't super great, but Dallas Turner was so disruptive, caused so much problems, had such an athletic ability that, you know, it kind of freed up other guys to make some plays and win some one-on-one opportunities. So I got to wrap with that, guys. Thanks for tuning in to the Brant Marshall Show. Stay tuned for more episodes and clips. Till next time, peace.